The top story of the hour, the Supreme Court will deliver an interim order at 10:30 a.m. today on petitions challenging the validity of the WAQF Amendment Act 2025. Earlier on 22 May, after the 3 consecutive days of hearings, the court had reserved its verdict. Remember, in the previous hearing, the petitioners described the law as being against the rights of Muslims and demanded an interim stay. Meanwhile, the central government had argued in favor of the law, and the debate involved around the government's arguments that WAQF is an Islamic concept but not an essential part of religion and therefore not a fundamental right. On whether WAQF should be seen as a charitable donation separate from Islam or as an integral part of religion, petitioners' counsel Kapil Sibal had said, and I quote, "For the afterlife, WAQF is a dedication to God. Unlike other religions, WAQF is a donation made to God," unquote. Now, joining me on the telecast is my colleague Sambhav Sharma. Sambhav, in terms of the hearing that is on the interim order on pleas challenging the WAQF Amendment Act 2025, we've seen earlier several arguments that have been made in terms of this hearing as well. Remember, there were 3 consecutive days the hearing took place and there were several arguments that were being made. Today, there are 3 issues that are set to be addressed. What exactly are you getting to know in terms of that?
Well, absolutely. See, the Supreme Court reserved its judgment after 3 days of marathon hearing where different counsels, including many senior counsel like Kapil Sibal, Abhishek Manu Singhvi, made certain arguments in the top court of the country supporting the WAQF and against this particular WAQF Amendment Act. As per them, Article 25 and 26 is something which gives special powers in a way. It's the constitutional powers to the minorities to administer this particular law of the.
I think Sambhav, we are facing some connection issues from your end, but viewers, I'd like to my colleague to stay on with us, but I'll be going over to the big wall over there to explain more details regarding this. Obviously, we've seen that the WAQF Amendment Act is something that has been a major point of discussion for quite some time. Now, the hearing is set to take place at 10:30 today, which is shortly, and we are tracking updates regarding that and the arguments that will be made. And obviously, this hearing will be on the 3 issues that are highlighted. But let's talk about the timeline of this as well. In terms of the WAQF Amendment Act 2025, on August 8, 2024, WAQF Amendment Bill 2025 introduced in Lok Sabha. So that's the timeline number 1, August 8, when this was introduced. April 3, 2025, Lok Sabha passed the WAQF Amendment Bill 2025. So firstly in August, then in April 3, then April 5, the President gives assent to the WAQF Amendment Act 2025. Again, when we're talking about the timeline of this, in April 8, 2025, the Act was officially notified and went into force. So that's the timeline when we're talking about the WAQF Amendment Act. Another point to notice is April 25, 2025, the Union Government filed A1332 page affidavit defending the Act, pardon me. So that's the update regarding that in terms of the timeline that we're getting to know. Another thing to note is on May 20 to 22, 2025, the Supreme Court heard arguments from all parties involved. So in terms of the hearing, that's the timeline on May 20 and 22. And when we're talking on May 22, 2025, the Supreme Court reserved its interim order on the petitions. So that's the timeline of the case when we're talking about it. Another date that we have taken into consideration is September 15, 2025. The Supreme Court is all set to pronounce its interim order today. So these are very crucial things to notice in terms of this. We have seen that WAQF is something that has been the point of discussion even in the Parliament and the monsoon session. And we've seen that several arguments that were made earlier on within the 3 days of hearing were something that were very important to note. Now, the interim order is set to take place at 10:30 a.m. Now, joining me on the telecast is Ashwini Dubey, attorney on record, Supreme Court. So, Ashwini Dubey, thank you so much for joining us on the telecast. You also have seen that there were several developments that we're seeing in this hearing. We've seen earlier that the Supreme Court reserved its order. Now, they are set to deliver their interim order on pleas challenging WAQF Amendment Act. What can one expect from this hearing? Especially we have seen earlier on the 3 days arguments that took place before this as well.
Yeah, of course, the judgment would be crucial one, because now the top court of the country would deliver its judgment. And by the interim order, three things were stated, three key issues were framed, including the power to denotify properties declared as work by courts, work by user, or work by deed, which cropped up during the hearing of plea challenge during the validity of WAQF Amendment Act 2025. Four important issues are here. Number one is what are the administrative bodies responsible for work management in India and what are their roles. Then the Work Act of 1995, which was enforced by the central government, currently regulates work properties. And under that, there are the three administrative bodies: Central Work Council, state work boards, work tribunals. So far as the section 40 of the Work Act, which was the major issue, which was cropped up during the, if you see the JPC also, that has been widely misused to declare private properties as work properties, causing legal battles and unrest. That is why there was a need to amend the Work Act, and there was a need to bring the Work Amendment Bill 2024 and the Musalman Work Repeal Bill 2025. Now, the one thing is important, that the illegal occupation of work plan, mismanagement and ownership disputes, delays in properties registration and surveys, and large-scale litigation cases and complaints to the ministry. So let us see how the courts take into consideration whether this is violative to the fundamental rights as has been argued, or it is well within the domain of the parliament to make the law and amendment is. Because the Work Act applies only to one religion, while no similar law exists for others. Now we have to see, we live in a country, the constitution says a secular country. If country is secular, then why there is a need to have a religious law to maintain the properties? That is one question. So that is the constitutional validity of Work Act. What steps and stakeholder consultations, whether they were taken and have been incorporated, and that has been considered duly. Supreme Court will also look into it. And what is whether the Supreme Court will go by the Parliament's amendment or will make its certain changes to that act, that amendment. That is also to be soon. Let's see what happens. But now the arguments are over. Now court has to take a final call, and we are waiting for the judgment. Over to you.
Advocate Ashwini Dubey, one more question to you is, you've also talked about this, but when we're talking about the government's stand and the opposition's objections, the opposition says that this WAQF amendment is seen as this is a continuation of the disenfranchisement of the Muslim community. This is seen as a target on the Muslim community. Do you think that's the correct statement by the opposition?
There are many people from different religions live in the country. Are there any law for the majority where they have been given sole right to administrate their properties? Jains, Sikhs, or Christians, or any other minorities who are living in the country. So why a particular law that to a particular community should be given, and when the constitution says that our nature is fabric is secular? Number two, if you talk about the question which have been raised over, that the work property will not be treated as a work, then the collector conducts an inquiry to ascertain if the property is government land. Where is the problem into it? If there is a dispute with respect to the property, then the collector or the revenue authorities or the sole bodies who look into the property papers and also conduct the evidences, and after that take the decision. There are three courts functioning in the country: civil court, high court, and the civil judiciary, district judiciary, union judiciary, and state judiciary. But it is an example that the jurisdiction of all three courts are barred. Neither the civil court has a jurisdiction to adjudicate the issues with respect to the waqf, neither the high court has the jurisdiction. There is a separate board, separate tribunal, and tribunal's decision is final and binding. So we live in a rule of law, and if we live in a rule of law, then one should be given a right to approach to the court of law to adjudicate that issue, which has been taken over by this act. That is why there was a need to amend it, and it is not violative to any other religions. There are many people from within that community itself who are who are saying that their properties have been illegally taken over by the work board. And once a work board, always a work board. Once work property, always a work property. Means no court can take a decision. So that is why there is a need to have a law which can oversee that whether there is a discrimination, arbitrariness, or the properties have been donated voluntarily. So why there should not be any check and balance? Over to you.